Welcome to STEAM Powered, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Gabriella Martini. Gabriella is a project manager, or as she terms it, a fixer, who is passionate about mentoring and promoting a healthier STEM pipeline. Join us as we talk about mechanical engineering, mentoring, mental health, and aquascaping. Good morning, Gabriella. Thank you for joining me today on STEAM Powered. It's wonderful to have you speaking with me today about mech-eng and your journey.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. Been looking forward to this chat for ages. Cool. So you started out in mech-eng, but what got you into mech-eng to start with?
Ooh, that one I can blame on my dad. Um, he, growing up, I would always find things fascinating and trying to figure out how they work. For additional context, my dad is an automotive mechanic, but has a weird spate.
Ah,
He's had a weird spate of other jobs in his life.
that's
Um,
cool.
and one thing that sticks out in my mind is uh, going on a McDonald's playground. Now, bear with me here, but going on a McDonald's playground, and I would always go back to my dad and explain to my dad how the playground worked, how things connected, like where you could go, things like that. And because
That's
my dad's,
cool.
yeah, and because my dad is mechanically minded, I think it got time in high school where I was like, I don't really know what to do. Like, I wasn't really taking school seriously, kind of a fly by
Yeah.
the seat of your pants kind of student. And he suggested it, and I was like, yeah, right, I'll give it a go. Ended up being a really good thing.
That's cool. So, did you just naturally find all the technical aspects just easy to come by, or did you have to work hard at it?
You have written, yeah, this is a good start. The answer, the answer, honestly, is no. I I went to high school here in Perth. Um, it was very much ingrained in my family where, you go from high school, you go to uni, you get the white picket fence. Like there was kind of a trajectory there.
Yeah.
None of my family had been to university before, so this was very
Ooh.
exciting.
Wow, that
Um,
is cool.
yeah. So I went to UWA, and nothing against UWA, but I lasted a year and a half there, and academically I
Ooh.
wasn't doing well. I had plenty of distractions at home. Um, but also, and I didn't realize this until much later, my learning style didn't blend with the teaching style of the teachers that were or the lecturers at UWA.
Yep.
And so I think that's why I did a lot better at RMIT. So I took a gap year after the year and a half at UWA. I think you can still call it a gap year. I escaped Perth. I went to
Technically.
Melbourne. I was like, shiny lights. Yep, give me all that. I ended up at RMIT doing a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering, and it's only then that I realized that RMIT has a very practical way of teaching concepts and also their
Mm-hmm.
theory as well. There is still that theory component. I did a lot better because
Yeah,
I could actually see how what we were learning applied to the real world.
that's cool.
And we were doing projects like designing a compressed air supply system for a workshop, or here's this might bore people or excite people, but at the time it was like, here's a graph of a piston. We want you to design the piston, develop the fabrication drawings for it, fabricate it, and then test it. And as close as you can get the original graph and your piston's graph depends your grade. So like things like
Wow,
that really
that
gelled
is
with me.
very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, the very practical aspect of being able to build it and say, "This is your objective. Can you make it meet these metrics?" That's a very interesting way of approaching it.
Yeah. Whereas my first round at uni, it was very, and like with most engineering degrees in the early years, like it is theory heavy, but you can do it in a different in different ways.
Yeah,
Yeah, the first way didn't stick. Reading books, just diving into literature, it's just not me.
yeah, that's fair. Like I felt the same thing when I was looking at computer science courses in high school, and people want to go to UWA because it's UWA. But when I was looking at the course curriculum. It's like, I don't know, I'm not feeling this. It
Yeah.
feels a bit more theory and a bit more math than I would want in the course that I'm doing. And that's how I ended up at Curtin. So yeah, I totally see that. It's just the way that you are more able to learn effectively.
Yep. I like a lot of people are like, oh, but how did you know? And I'm like, I didn't realize that until like years later when I was like,
Yeah,
oh, this is why I'm doing better.
yeah, exactly. You're,
And I
you're just
think
not
that's what,
quite sure.
yeah. I was like so naive going through that. It was just like, you have to go to uni, you have to do this.
Yeah,
And I think that's why I get really interested in mentoring programs, or I found an interest like after leaving university, because I didn't have a lot of that guidance and I didn't have, you know, connections with folks, whether that's family or friends or whoever, that had gone down that path at uni. I
yeah,
really didn't know what I should be looking for, like what's good, how to do this, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing that another guest has spoken about at being a first gen college student. And she said she just had no idea. She didn't know a lot of the things that people took for granted who had those networks, who had family who'd been through university and college. It's like, I don't know what I don't know here. And
Mm,
it was quite a learning experience for her too. Yeah.
yeah, it's a fun one.
It is a fun one. Yeah. So when you like now that you've actually come out of mech engine going into industry, how did you find your path? Like, was it always going to be mining because this is just what we do in Western Australia? Or did you have any ideas of how you wanted to apply all of those skills?
I don't know if this is going to get me in trouble, but I never thought I'd come back to Perth. I never thought I'd come back here. I thought it would be like onto Melbourne, just anywhere, anywhere at
Yeah.
all. I remember when I was going for my internship, which was a requirement for a mech eng degree or an engineering degree at the time, still is.
Hmm.
Uh, I put out like 18 applications, and I think I
Wow.
applied to like Mars because I was like, working in confectionery might be cool. Working in the
Yeah.
mining industry might be cool. I applied at Ford and just
Yeah.
everywhere.
Everywhere. And
Um,
it's such a range of applications of mech eng as well. I mean, manufacturing and mining and, vehicles, it's wide.
it's what makes the discipline so good. And this is where I'm biased when people are like, oh, I don't know what I should be doing in what engineering degree should I focus on? And I'm like, have you heard about mechanical? Like, just like you can literally go anywhere. You can work for a big company and get experiences all over the globe. I know that's different with COVID, but I still see things picking up in that space. Like I've
Yeah.
traveled during COVID, it is possible. Um, yeah, or you can make equally as big an impact in a small community if you want to work there as a
Yeah,
mechanical engineer. Like
absolutely.
there's such a range. I'm gonna waffle on about it, so I'll stop myself there.
No, no, keep waffling. It's great because a lot of people think about mech eng. I mean, because it's, WA, we all think mining resources. That's where we go for
Yeah.
mech eng. But yeah, absolutely. When you do vehicle manufacturing, you've got all the machining and, the stuff that you do with, how you make, how you mass produce and how you mass package things. All of that comes under mech eng. And
Mm,
you don't always think about how you can apply these skills in this broader context and how it is part of our everyday lives. We don't understand how integrated it is.
mm. I think that's something about being something special around being a mechanical engineer in WA. If we pick on that manufacturing piece, unfortunately Australia doesn't have too much of a manufacturing industry in comparison
Yeah,
to other countries around the world. Um, so as much as manufacturing engineering is a different discipline to
yeah,
mechanical, there are similarities there, and you can still flex. So you can build that skill set within yourself to make yourself even more valuable to employers should they want to go down the manufacturing path. Because a lot of folks now, engineering's getting creative. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in Perth.
yes,
Um, and I think a lot of the mindsets are changing from, and maybe this has been prompted a little bit more so from COVID. Um, why not actually manufacture things here in Australia? There's pros and cons, but
yeah,
uh, it's definitely an option.
It is absolutely an option. And I mean, specifically for us, we're getting such a wide variety of things that we can do in terms of industry. So, yes, considering manufacturing, they were thinking about doing the batteries at some point. There's, now we're getting a lot into space programs. And,
Mm.
the variety of industries that are now available to us is, it's phenomenally greater than what it used to be 10, 20 years ago. And yeah, it just adds so much more flexibility to how we can apply and advance our skills in different ways.
Yeah, that's what got me really excited to work for the company I currently work for, FirstMode.
Yeah.
After spending 7 years fly in, fly out in the Pilbara, in the mining industry, don't get me wrong, that was amazing. First off, didn't think I would last 7 years, FIFO.
A lot of people
It goes
say that
really
and they end
quickly.
up for ages. Yeah.
Yes. Everyone either has a 2 or a 5 year plan, but it got to 7 years. Like, I think I was just shy, like maybe a couple of weeks shy, which I was like, oh, why? Anyway, um, but kind of moving from that and finding FirstMode, and they were really just starting up in Australia. I joined when we had the general manager and a principal software architect here in Perth.
Mm,
And I remember the three of us sitting in WeWork in a tiny 3-person office, and thinking what what can we make of this? For context, FirstMode globally, it's almost 4 years old. Um, they work on predominantly space hardware. Well, not really. I'm not doing it justice enough. It's it's really like the tagline is it's a creative engineering company. So it's not just space, because there are so many similarities between working on a piece of hardware that has to go to space and perform a certain function to sticking it out in the Pilbara.
yeah.
Because whilst one's on Earth and one's not, there's still, they want easier to maintain or low to no maintenance parts,
Yeah.
something that's reliable, that's autonomous, that's, let's just call it smart.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the similarities sit there. So
Mm,
to join a company who had already built a fantastic base in Seattle in the States, to then branch out here to service the customer base that's in Australia, and make a real difference, like whilst being in Perth, like that was fantastic.
yes, absolutely. It's rare that we often get international opportunities in Perth because everyone wants to go to Sydney and Melbourne and all that. So,
Yeah,
being able to find that niche here is absolutely fantastic.
yeah, it's crazy as well. It's Perth is an interesting place. I thought it was just mining and resources,
Yeah.
and my partner who works in the technology field, he always told me, no, 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 there's so much more, because he works with a lot of partners, a lot of smaller companies trying to do things, and I was like, that's nice. It's just mining. And then I had to put my tail between my legs when I actually joined FirstMode and started learning more about it, because I was like, okay, there's actually more in Perth than just mining.
Yeah.
There's a lot of there's a lot of support for the mining industry and the work that's happening there, but it's not the traditional, like, yeah, we're just going to change out this conveyor belt, or we're just going to, you know, do things as we normally have.
I'm finding it hard to articulate this because it's such a wide range of applications. They're all very similar overlaps, but the imagineering involved to create all these,
Mm.
very large machines. Like, we're not talking about small things, we're talking about giant vehicles and, the things that you send up to space. People don't think about how big those machines actually are.
Mm.
Like, how do you handle the scale when you're starting to approach these industries of the kind of things that you need to build?
I think it's important to break the system down. And I think that's where I haven't seen this as much in Perth, at least from what I've experienced so far, is this approach to systems engineering. Every industry seems to have a different approach to this, but being able to break a system down and actually articulate what is its function, what is its intended function, and think about it from that perspective. And then working closely, like at least our approach, working closely with the customer to make sure that, you know, what is being designed, what we are building, like, does it actually meet the intent? keeping up with how the market's moving? Is it actually innovative? And having those constant checkpoints, whether it's with the customer that I just pointed out, or even if it's within ourselves and going, is this actually the best? Like, let's actually boil it down to first principles. What are we actually trying to achieve here?
Yeah.
I think that's critical, instead of maybe potentially getting overwhelmed with, we've got to build a vehicle. It's got to do this. Where do you start? Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So transitioning from, an actual practical mech eng kind of role to project management, and as you want to call it, a fixer in coordinating all of this, how do you go from, those two roles? How do you transition into that kind of position?
I found that they had very similar elements. When I left the mining industry, I was leading engineering teams in an operational setting, which is very different to a project setting.
Yes.
Very, very different. But there are definitely transferable skill sets there with how you interact with others, how you set goals, how you break down a problem, that kind of translate across. Now, I'm definitely not the perfect PM, but I think that it almost kind of gives me an edge, I feel, because you're not just sticking with a certain project management formula,
Mm-hmm.
which I found some PMs it's very easy to fall into that trap. If you fall into a pre-existing formula and you're just carrying out the steps.
Yep.
Whereas like the types of problems that we tackle, there is no formula for
Yes.
it. Like there is no formula to develop a vehicle, or like no matter if it's meant to function on Earth or in space. There are guidelines and things like that, but you kind of have to have a different approach to it, as opposed to like, oh yeah, we'll just apply all these things and yep, vehicle pops out the other side.
Yeah. So in your previous role in mining, part of your work involved governance and, that kind of management aspect of projects. So where does governance come in terms of mining and engineering?
Oh, this is a broad topic in itself. Love it. I think it gets a bad rap, but where it comes into it is ultimately, are we doing what we said that we'll do in order to keep the plant operating, and more importantly, operating in a safe fashion? There are obligations to not only to the team members on site within the company, but also to the communities in which we operate.
Yeah.
So it's really important that the right checks and balances are in there with the right technical expertise, because, what's the point in auditing something if, you get someone with a completely like no knowledge of the situation needing to perform a technical audit? Sometimes that doesn't go exactly to plan.
Yeah.
Now, on the balance of that, a fresh set of eyes is always great. And I think that was what one of the good things of being part of the governance and technical stewardship team was you weren't in the team that necessarily performed the execution work, but you were there. Like our team was incredibly technically capable, had either come from maintenance or operations backgrounds, and could actually see what the site was trying to achieve, but then also, what we needed to do to either improve it, make sure that we were in compliance with legislative requirements, things like that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of, I guess, legal and law and all that like compliance stuff that's involved in mining and engineering, not just from safety, but local laws and local governance and local regulations in terms of the way that these things are done for, mining. We're pulling stuff out of the ground. We're having to work with the people in the area that we're doing this stuff in.
Yeah. I remember one thing when I first started. I laugh because I feel like most graduates go through this journey, at least if you're based on an operation on a mine site. It's you get involved in what's called a classified plant. I don't know how many listeners are going to know the background of that. It's a particularly dry topic where effectively there's high risk equipment on site, which could either, drop a person from height or, for lack of a better way, explode. An intense burst of energy. So like a pressure vessel or something like that fails, that could cause severe, that puts someone's safety at risk.
Yeah.
and can either seriously harm them or lead to a fatality.
Yep.
And there's a number of checks as part of our legislation here in Western Australia that need to be put in place, internal, external inspections. It gets quite detailed, needs to marry up to Australian standards, that sort of thing. And I remember doing it in my first rotation as a graduate, and I was just like, there was that sense of ownership, like, yeah, this is exciting. And then everyone else would be like, oh, why are you on that? Like, what, like, that form of governance wasn't sexy?
Yep.
And then actually a few years later, I was part of the material risk ownership structure at the company I worked at, and I actually inherited classified plant. And there's a whole different context there for why it's important. And then it's a whole different skill to then engage people on, why it's important to actually do these inspections and make sure that we have the documentation
Yep.
for the plant. Like that's a whole, you'd think it'd be simple as get documentation, when a new pressure vessel or a crane comes to site. But wow, it was a real challenge because it just wasn't front of mind for people.
Yeah, it isn't.
So I guess like if I draw a similarity there to project management, like this is where the people interaction comes from. Governance can seem like such a dry, you sit in a dark room and you're looking through paperwork like just yourself, but it's so much more than that because the greater success you have in that space is how you interact with people, how you actually work through the problems together, because sometimes it's not black and white, a lot of it's pretty grey.
Yeah.
um Same thing with project management, especially when you're dealing with a problem that no one's tried to tackle before from the ground up, is right, this is really grey. How do we work on this together?
Yeah. And there's grey, there's unexplored territory. Yeah, in terms of, all the stuff that you have to do for the policy and governance. People only think about 0 days since last incident kind of thing. And it's, all these little things that happen that people take for granted because they go, well, it's just meant to work the way it is, isn't it? That's just how it goes. And you forget about all those kinds of extra bits that, are important in terms of making sure all that dry stuff gets taken care of.
Yeah. And if we tie that into like one of the draw cards for being a mechanical engineer, the problem solving aspect, identifying patterns and then putting in solutions, a lot of that comes through in the governance space. Is you might have, similar or the same events that occur over, 2-3 years. I mean, hopefully not fewer than that. But even if it is, it's still a chance to actually go through and understand what the pattern is and actually go, challenge, why do we do it this way? Can we do it slightly differently? Do we even need people involved?
Yeah.
Things like that.
That's very cool.
I'm talking like high level here because I've gone through far too many of them myself to like hone in on one specific example. But that's what's exciting about the mining industry as well, is it has changed. I was only in the industry for 7 years, which really is a blip in comparison to the grand scheme of things. But even within that 7 years, and then specifically being a female engineer in that space, I saw a change.
Yeah.
There were good and bad moments, but there has been a lot of change in that space.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a kind of industry where they are constantly changing because of the nature of the work that they do. There's always going to be innovation, always going to be changes to legislation. There's always going to be, all these, improvements or modifications in the way that we do these sorts of things because of the nature of the work. It's very exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I paint it so well, and then it's like, yeah, but then I left. I'm joking. Sorry, that was a bad joke.
No, but it's still one of those things where, it's part of your journey. It is, just because you've left it, it doesn't mean that it didn't have an impact on you and your career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where if I look back, what month are we? If you were to ask me about 8.5 years ago where I might be, which really, again, that's not a long period of time, I would never have thought that I would have had the career that I have had and the sort of experience that I have had. It's just, it's crazy to think, especially from kind of the momentum I had through high school and through my first round of uni, or even in my second round of uni, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah. When we have to make those sorts of decisions at such a young age, I think it is very challenging because you don't know what's out there for you and you don't know what potential there is. So you end up making these choices and it's like, yeah, let's give this a shot. But it feels kind of vague.
Yes, there's still this stigma, though, I feel that, you've got one chance, you've got one shot to pick what you want to
Yeah.
do. And all this pressure at high school to pick the degree that is going to influence the rest of your life. And it couldn't be more opposite than that. That's something I really didn't appreciate. And I guess like through some of the programs that I'm part of, I still get surprised that stigma still exists.
It does.
And I just love using myself as an example of, here's all the weird stuff I've tried. Here's all the weird stuff that just didn't work.
Yeah.
That I just like outright failed at. And like even failed when I got into industry. But these are all the things that have come from it. Like nothing, this is going to sound corny, but I'm one of these people that doesn't have regrets, because I think there's always good parts and bad parts to pick up from a certain event, even if it's the worst thing that ever happened to you. And you're going through an absolutely terrible time. For example, whilst I was working in the mining industry, look, I've lived with anxiety and depression since my early teenage years. It's just a factor of who I am. It's what I live with. And it got to a pretty dark spot when I was working FIFO. And I had to take some time off. That was probably one of the roughest breakdowns I'd ever had. But I think coming out of that, it completely changed me. And I don't mean to go full corny about this, but I wouldn't actually have had it any other way, because that really changed the trajectory of where, what I was doing in my personal life, how I was approaching and thinking about things, what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. Like that was a real pivot point for me. But ordinarily I hear people say, it's like, oh, I'm embarrassed about this, or I wish it never happened. And I'm like, well, without going to that level of low, at least my personal opinion, without going there, you really can't look at things from a fundamental level and go, like, how do I change things? What am I doing? The normal existential crisis we all go through, right?
Absolutely. The why am I here? Oh gosh. But
why am I here?
Yeah, and it's hard because there's that stigma still, because it's vulnerability, it's weakness, and that's how it's conveyed. It's getting better now, but for some people they need that kind of shake up to be able to get perspective, as you said. But there's no shame in it. There is no need to feel that looks poorly on you. Yeah. It's tough.
Exactly. And I could talk about this for too long, probably. I think it got to a point, it was actually shortly after that breakdown where I kind of sat back and I was like, I can't be silent on this anymore. Like I didn't talk about it openly, but I'd shared parts with people, and it's different folks respond to it in different ways. But then I realized that I wasn't exactly helping the whole mental health stigma situation by keeping quiet. Because the more that we open up, I remember there was a time where I shared it with a larger group of people, and more about my history in my early 20s and late teens, and the amount of people that actually shared very similar stories. One of the best feelings I've ever had.
So when you took that time off to reflect and to recover, what sort of changes came out of that for you?
Some really good ones. I have been terrible with self-care my entire life. It boils down to a couple of different things. I think my father and this isn't hanging him up on this at all, but I got my work ethic from my father, and it's this constant strive towards like, I can do things better. Everything can be better. Not in terms of material, but like constantly
Yeah.
building on something. And often I'd lose sight of myself, like caring for myself, making sure that I got the right R&R, I was taking the right breaks. I was getting like, what is it, 2 fruit, 5 veg, getting 8 hours of sleep,
Yeah.
the basic stuff, right? Because everything was just so exciting. And I think as part of like coming out of that 2-week period, I actually got to, and this is going to sound really fluffy, but I got to recenter on myself. I did yoga once a day in that second week because I was like, you know what? People love yoga. I'm going to try this. How does this work? And it worked. It worked really well. I kept it up for a bit. The place closed down that I went to, which is probably a really bad excuse, but it helped me through at least that time and kind of like not just focusing on what I was doing, but focusing on myself. And it's something I can see others get so wrapped up in as well. I think there are some people that do it really well. My partner, for example, is an absolute legend when it comes to that balance. People like calling it that work-life balance. I just see it as a life. So it's like that balance in life instead of work life.
Absolutely.
Anyway, he does it incredibly well. And so he was actually a really good person to model that from. And actually, make sure you stop for lunch. Make sure you do this, you do that, get regular exercise, things like that. And it's something I share with others. It might sound like a bit of an overshare, but again, if you don't talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, again, because mental health ends up being something that we do stigmatize, it is hard to talk about, the ways that we can make that a focus for ourselves. Because, everyone's all about being productive, doing something useful, being functional. And, it's always hustle all the time. But, that's the fastest route to burnout, right? So being able to talk realistically about what self-care actually means, and not as a band-aid, but as an ongoing thing to, keep yourself centered all the way through. That's something that I think a lot of people still struggle with trying to get in their life.
And like, it's different for everyone. I mentioned before yoga, and I laugh because like I feel like that's the stereotypical thing is people are like, I want to find myself. I'm either going to go on a retreat or go to yoga. And I'm not trying to poke fun at those things, but like for some people they work. For some people they try it and they're just like, no, this is dumb. Like for me, this just doesn't work. Actually, another thing that I picked up during that 2-week break is actually writing a reflection journal, which I know friends listening to this are going to give me so much shit for, but it works because that gratitude piece and actually that forced reflection of, I have to think about today. What are the good things? What were the things that weren't so good and how did they make me feel? Doing all of that I found has been incredibly useful.
Yeah, and
I feel it's a bit underrated.
It is underrated, and I am an inconsistent journaler, so I'll either end up writing like 3 pages in one go or just a sentence. It's there's no in between. But there's a couple of apps that I started downloading to do that kind of daily reflection thing, and I didn't find a gratitude journal personally as valuable more just reflection. So what happened today? How did I how did I go today? How do I feel about today? What am I doing tomorrow that's going to, just little things like that, just to kind of bring everything back in a bit closer to, where I am at. And I think that has helped a lot because I get to go, okay, refocus. This is good. And, this didn't go so well. How can we not make that happen again?
Yeah. And this might be like delving too far into it or be too specific, but I found good tools in just, it's not sponsored, but there's an app called Reflectly. I don't know how many people are aware of it, but it's a really cute user interface. But it has really
Yeah.
good prompting questions, and sometimes I'll need that prompt. I'm the same. I'll either write a lot, or I'll write a sentence just to be like, "Yep, check. Yep, I did my reflection. Yep, I'm just not in the mood." Um, so I'm not the best at this
Yeah.
reflection game, let's call it, but having something that kind of prompts like how, like, what's something great that happened today that made you feel great, or other little prompts like that, I've found actually kind of gets
Yeah.
the wheels turning, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, now I'm getting into it, instead of a blank page that's just like, right, do I write about what I had for lunch? Do I admit to having ramen again? Like, like there's more than that.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so the ones that I use are 5 Minute Journal. Found that one ages ago, and it just asks you what are 3 things that you're grateful for today.
Oh,
And I know I
nice.
said gratitude is not a big thing, but it said go into details about stuff. So it's like, I'm grateful, honestly, for daycare today. I really appreciated that there was daycare today. That was amazing. I really love it. It's little things like that.
Yeah.
And you can be very honest about some of those things, and it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm grateful that there's world peace, I'm grateful that we're safe, blah blah blah. You are actually drilling down. It's like, nope, I
Yeah.
really appreciated that cup of coffee. That was a great cup of coffee this morning. And
Yep.
you think about it.
The first one that came to my mind was like, I'm really grateful for aircon, especially from the past week. Like,
Yes, exactly. It's like air
that's when
conditioning. I love air conditioning. Best friend
yep,
ever.
yep. First world problem when it breaks down, but I love air conditioning.
Yeah. And it feels contrived, but you are thinking about, what's around you as opposed to the problems that you've got. And
Mm,
it does make me get a bit more perspective, because sometimes, you do get overwhelmed. It's like, oh, I've got so
mm,
much to do. It's just one thing after another. It's like, but aircon, that's a good thing in my life. I'm happy with that.
yeah. I just realized how that's going to make me sound. I'll own
I
it,
know.
whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. Like, it's the little things, whatever keeps you going, really. So,
Yeah,
yeah, you can make it as contrived or as deep, as meaningful as you want, but you get to reflect on it. And I think that's the important part of that activity.
yeah,
And yeah, I find it really useful. So it's good.
yeah. Getting yourself to slow down.
It
I'm talking
is.
about it a bit now, but it's that hustle that you mentioned
Mm,
before. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to
yeah.
be, um, every second. You have to
Yeah.
like pack in your calendar, and I'm definitely guilty of that. So,
Yes.
if the journal gets me to write about aircon and how much I love it, like that's getting me to slow down in the
Yeah,
moment. And it might seem really
exactly.
trivial, but yeah, it's needed.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, because I live with checklists. Every morning I have
Oh
my to-do list,
yes,
and I go through, and it's like, right, got to do this, this, and this today. What can be bumped? What needs to be shuffled up? And I'm just living by checklists, and it's ridiculous, and it's constant hustle, but it's not all work. It's like, this is house stuff, this is kid stuff, this is family stuff, this is work stuff.
it's
And
just a
then so,
different work.
yeah, it's different work. But when you get so tunneled into having to do that activity, it's exhausting, like before you even
Mm,
start the day. So, yeah, being able to do all that other stuff does bring you out of it a bit, and it's
mm,
nice. I like it.
yeah.
Yeah. So, is this the kind, like, because of your experiences with all of this and having to reflect on your balance in life, is that what motivated you to be so involved with mentorship?
I think so, because there is a large piece that, you know the reflection and the mentoring side for the mentor, I think, is very strongly connected.
Yep.
Um, and as much as like a mentoring relationship is about, focusing on the mentee and what their immediate needs are, and how you can help them in that way, you get a lot back from it, because you can't
Yeah.
you at least from what I find, I talk through experiences, and either when I'm talking through it or the mentee will ask a certain question, I'll be like, oh, oh, okay, I hadn't actually thought about that before. and, I'll have my own moment where I'm like, mental note, I'm just gonna
I need to
reflect
take a
on that
minute
one
here.
after this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, just make a quick note. Cool. I need to digest that afterwards because I never thought of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was a driver. Again, the fact that I didn't feel like I had mentors growing up. I mean, I had my dad, um, who was a massive influence over my life, as all our parents are. I think more so in my particular situation because my mum wasn't really in the picture, and she kind
Hmm.
of wasn't in the picture at all when I was about 16.
Yep.
Um, so we my sister and I kind of joke around that our dad was our mother and father, so we call him Father. He
Father.
gets 2 days a year, Mother's and Father's Day, but he had such an impact there
Mm.
that um, yeah, that kind of drove me to going, you know what? I haven't had every experience in life, um, and hey, maybe 50% of the stuff that I've experienced isn't of use to anyone, or maybe higher, maybe like 99%, 95%, whatever. But if like 1% of that experience can help someone at that time
Mm.
and they can go through those learnings and kind of cherry pick things that will make them successful in their life, then it's 100% worth it. Like,
Yes.
even if it's like hours and hours of chats and they take one thing away from it, sure, it's a lot of time invested, but you've had an impact on that person,
Yeah.
and like you've helped them.
Yeah. That's amazing. And, you know, even from the hours and hours of chat and, they only take the one true thing away, they still have had to process all the other stuff that you've spoken about to think about how that fits for them and how that works out in their mind
Mm,
of, what they're thinking about. So it's still all processing and they're still taking it away. So
yeah.
yeah, all of it's valuable.
I make it sound very one sided as well. Sorry, focusing on like myself as the mentor and helping mentees. But I guess like I found the same thing in many
Yeah.
mentors that I've had after I joined industry.
Mm.
Um, whether it's through formal mentoring programs or through just connecting with someone on LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
know that this can be very off putting, but just like sending a blind invite, being like, hey, I noticed this about your background. Do you mind if we get a coffee or a virtual coffee and just like have a chat about this?
Yeah.
And I remember there was I'd been flirting with this idea of getting an MBA. I think a lot of people that do mechanical engineering either this is a very broad generalization, but you either stay technical and you go really deep into the technical side, or you go into management.
Yeah.
I think there's a fun saying, all the bad engineers go into management. And I'm like, yep, that's me. Uh, so anyway, I was flirting with this idea of an MBA. I still kind of flirt with the idea now, but I know at the time I was maybe like 3, 4 years out of
Mm.
uni. So like not a whole lot of experience. Um, and I found a really interesting lady that had done her MBA over 10 years, and it was just a
Wow.
blind connection through LinkedIn. And we ended up catching up only a couple of times, but like even just learning about her decision process and how
Mm.
she went about it. And, she was very similar to me. She was like 5 years or 6 years part time at uni while you're working full time. Can't imagine anything like worse. Um, and she actually taught me it's like she identified aspects of the course that she did over a period of time and did them in short courses and things to satisfy the immediate needs, but in manageable chunks. And
Yeah.
eventually she just worked her way up to that.
Mm.
And I think that's what influenced me to, weirdly enough, not enroll in an MBA, um, but actually to do a number of short courses on the side and actually
Yeah.
go, you know what? I don't have to do another degree. I don't
Yeah.
have to go back to university. Like, that's not the pathway because for some reason it was still in my head. You
Yeah.
want further education, you go back to uni.
Yeah. You do your masters, you do
Um,
your whatevers, yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
Um, and instead doing short courses through, like I did sustainable business strategy through Harvard Business Online.
Yeah.
Um, earlier last year now,
Mm.
I've almost got my dates wrong, but early 2021,
Yeah.
um, I did a systems engineering very short course that lasted for 3 months. Very intensive. I spent
Mm.
most of my weekends doing it. But it scratched that itch, and it kind of it kept my mind. It kept me going.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, as you said, it's a thing where it's a very conventional way of thinking that once you enter the industry, it's natural for you to go into an MBA, or if you are that way inclined, you head into a PhD or some other sort of masters. But these days there's so many more opportunities to get this additional learning without having to go through that formalized route. And honestly, a lot of people are viewing that kind of formal education in a very different light now. And I'm pro tertiary education and university courses. That's just the way I am. I got so much value out of it, but that's because it's my learning. Like, that's the way that I learn, and that's how I found it valuable. But I think it's amazing that we have so many ways of being able to extend and expand what we know through short courses. Not exactly Udemy. I find stuff like that still a little bit too low level, but having all these other certificates available where you can pick and choose, and especially because there's so many ways that you can take your career. So as you said, there's mech eng, but manufacturing's a bit different. So if you wanted to explore a slightly different area, you do a short course or you do a certificate, and you can start to explore that area and see where you want to go with that, and then from there make your decision whether you want to do formal education or some other way that you want to head into that route. But it allows you to, I guess, hone where you want to have your career without having a structured course forced on you, which is great.
Yeah, and I think a slightly different take to it as well, outside of the not the whole structured course, because I don't think I've spoken to a single person who's gone to a university, like done a university degree, and they've loved every single elective. Like there's always always those units where you're like, why?
Yeah, they're always those units.
Yeah, and you're like, but you still got to pay for them.
Yes.
And I think that's being an Italian background, at least this is what I pin it on. There's a certain, frugality with money.
Yeah.
And a lot of these courses, like online, they're really, they're I can't remember the word right now. Cost effective is the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to get yourself into tens of thousands of dollars in debt for a degree.
Yes, exactly.
Which is full of electives that you're like, cool, why did I do photography 101? Because it was the only thing I had to do and I had to get credits.
Yes.
But I can actually do like a dedicated course that I've got some like actual value, and it's far cheaper.
It is. And you can tailor it to what your current occupation is. So as you were doing, like, you needed to fill a specific space, and that allowed you to do it, and in a way that you don't have to kind of commit yourself to part-time night courses, 3 times a week. So yeah, it's much more flexible.
That's why I did photography 101. No, and for anyone who has done photography 101 or something similar, nothing wrong with it. It was just, it's so different to the field, like my interests.
Yes.
But it was one that was on offer, and for some reason it's in my head.
Yes.
Anyway.
Well, there are always those electives as well. It's like, but why? Yeah. It's like, this program, it's like, I understand you want to be able to, create a diverse experience here. But it's like, but why? Yeah. And
there'll be that one person where it floats their boat.
Exactly.
Good on them.
Exactly. And it's something that's come up as well with university common first years, and the way that some universities structure that. And some of them have, you can choose anything from 1,000 different courses, but then you end up with this mishmash of everything where, yes, you've had to explore stuff, but how do we tie it in? It's experience that you can apply later on, but it's not exactly relevant to your current program. So, having to weigh that up. And then there are others where they offer a very narrow selection of units, and it's like, well, now this is too focused, why don't you just make it core at this point? Like, it's a difficult balance. Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah. So how do you juggle being involved in so many mentorship programs and work at the same time? Like, I'm just looking at your the programs that you are involved. It's like, wow, that's a lot of mentoring to do.
It is. That self-care thing I mentioned before? I'm joking. I too am a list person. And I became a calendar person a few years back.
Yeah. Just Gantt chart
I
your
often
life.
get comments. Seriously, like it's, I've had comments from people who have looked over my shoulder at work and they'll be like, what are all the colors? Like, what is all this? When do you have time? And I'm like, well, I make time. Here's all the working time. Anyway, like, time is a finite resource.
Yeah.
That's definitely not a new concept. And I think that's the way that I've treated, like, FIFO kind of taught me this particularly well, because I was on a 5243 roster and I would only have, 48 hours or whatever it was in Perth for that week, which you got to cram all the life admin, your social life, your R&I, you got to cram all that stuff into there. And I didn't do particularly well at it first, maybe a year or so.
Yeah.
Because you're still kind of trying to adjust with like, I can do everything. What are you talking about?
I've got plenty of time. 3 days, amazing. I can do everything. It's fine.
Exactly. And then you realize, no, you don't. So I religiously go by my calendar. I don't just book in. I think I've seen a few people do this, but I'm still surprised that not more people do it. Actually booking at you time or working time, whether that's working on work stuff or whether that's working on personal stuff. And actually setting aside that time, because as we all would know, who like those who have office jobs where you rely on your calendar, if you don't book your own time out, someone else is probably going to book it out for you, right? You always get that invite slip in and you're like, I really needed to prep for this other meeting and now I feel bad for declining your meeting.
Yeah.
So I kind of have taken hold of that. It's been a really good exercise in time management and actually estimating time for tasks, but also making sure that, Saturday mornings for me booked out with my weekly bike ride.
Yeah. That's a good way of doing it.
And yeah, it's like, it has to happen. And maybe this is just the way my brain is wired, but it's like the calendar says it is, and so it is that. Like, it's just, I've kind of wired myself to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I break free and I go, I want to ignore you, calendar. I'm going to go off and do something else. I'm not going to go for a bike ride. I'm going to go do this.
Yeah.
And you feel rebellious, but maybe that's my little, that's just the fun quirk, let's say.
Yes. But it is true though, because if you're not booking out your own time, or you're not making a conscious effort about setting aside that time for yourself, it's very easy to go, oh, but it's only me time. I can just keep doing this for a bit longer.
Yes.
Yeah. And that just
exactly.
creeps.
And like,
yeah.
As it returns back into the self-care conversation.
It does.
Which I know isn't like aligned with, talking about STEM careers and all that, but like really you can't.
It is aligned.
This is going to be a generalized statement, but you can't have a career, you can't have a lot of these things if you don't exist.
Yeah.
Like there's an absolute necessity.
It is. And like you can't perform well if you're not, at your best. So if you're constantly distracted, if you're melting down, you're not going to be able to perform. You're not going to be able to have your career and do what you need to do. So, it is an essential part of these careers. And you hear about a lot of women making it about 10 years into STEM careers and then just bugging out because either cultural issues or they're just not feeling that, they haven't got who they are sorted out either. And, the average is apparently about 10 years when we burn out and decide to see change, which I find really quite, like, on one hand, not surprised. On the other hand, it's really short. Like, this is not a long period at all.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and like the finding yourself out piece, like that was a real worry for me personally early on. I don't think I realized it, but there were a number of years there where it was just like chasing the next thing. It was just like, I need to do this. And it wasn't external motivators that drove me. It was all internal. It was, just how I'm wired. I kind of lost sight. And I think that's going back to that 2 weeks that I kind of like my 2 week breakdown, and then like build back up. Like that was another point in my life where it was just like, okay, existential crisis. Who am I? Like, but more importantly, like, who do I want to be?
Yeah.
Because I really didn't, I didn't like certain aspects of myself at that point in time. but didn't beat myself up and kind of put myself in a bit of a deeper hole. But yeah, it's definitely something. Sorry, I've lit up here because it's definitely something I've worried about, getting caught up in the moment, and especially with the movement that is women in STEM, it's very easy to get carried away and try and conform to the norm and fit in and be successful and be that one, because we're all wanting that change.
Yes.
Like I haven't met a single woman that hasn't wanted that change. But it's so easy to lose yourself in the process or just like forget who you are.
Exactly. And, whether implicit or explicit, you feel this need to perform better than others. And you're just pushing yourself constantly. And, in some cases, that is what has to happen. But in other cases, a lot of people go too far the other way. And again, leads back to the balance thing, because you end up constantly chasing without actually getting time to reflect and have that perspective about where it is you want to be, who it is you want to be. And
what's important to you.
Exactly.
It's I'm sitting here smiling because I'm just like, I would not have thought I'd be having this conversation like several years ago. Like at all. Just like an open conversation about topics like this, because it's just, it's a sign of weakness. Like even talking about, what do you mean you've thought about who you want to be? What do you mean you've actually had a breakdown, you like realigned what you were working on to make sure that you spent time on the things that were important to you? Didn't you just know that? And it's like, well, no, I didn't. Like, I don't think a lot of us do. That's my gut feel. And from when I've spoken to people, I'm like, I don't think I'm too far off. I'm just getting excited because it's a whole different conversation that is getting more momentum, and that just excites me.
It is absolutely exciting. And I've spoken to people who end up being half generation kind of past where I was, because I'm 40 now, and I'm speaking to people who have just recently started entering industry. And even then, some of the ideas that they had about what they needed to do in deciding the direction of their life is still the same. It's a lot of similarity with what I did when I was their age. It's like, we've seen 20 years pass, and people are still thinking in this same sort of way. And it's very traditional and conventional thinking. But there's so much change now in the way that we can approach stuff. And it's just, ingrained in us that that's how we're supposed to think. That's how we're supposed to approach our choices. And there's a little bit of incongruity with these open conversations about having to do that reflection, having to do that thinking about who we are and what we want to do and where we want to be. So I find it very interesting that, we're still trying to conform to these old ideas, even though we know that all these other options exist.
Yeah. I see like a correlation there with how we just tackle problems at work, right? And this might be a bit of a stretch, but the way that we treat ourselves, and we kind of like a better way to put it, like do a bit of problem solving to figure out what's wrong, versus like how we apply that in the workplace, for example. Like more and more creative solutions and more honest conversations are needed to actually reap the real benefit, whether you're, okay, this is going to sound corny, but it's like whether you're building a vehicle or like rebuilding yourself.
It's true.
It's the old ways. That's too much of a generalization, but a lot of the tested and true ways work, but some of them don't. And a lot of that convention is kept up. And maybe I'm speaking in too general terms here, because I'm also one of these people around, thoughts around marriage and all this kind of like all these traditions that kind of pass through going to uni. And uni is actually, if we bring it back to the uni part, uni is the only pathway, like you have to do this to be successful, like it's the only way. It's like, no, it's
Yeah.
not. It's a
Yes,
way. It's not the only way.
exactly. So yeah, it's just getting
Yeah.
people to think about things in other ways. But again, it's not one or the other. Like you don't have to choose the new way versus the old way. Like there's no need to have that make it completely mutually exclusive. And it's balance, but trying to figure out the path that works best for you. And if uni works for you, that's the route you take. If, you know, learning on the job
Mm,
or trade or apprenticeship type things work for you, you do that. Because some people are a lot more practical in their
mm,
learning. They need to have that, that practical application of what they're doing in order to make it work for them. And not all environments are going to provide that. So, yeah,
mm.
having options.
I love the summary. Having options.
Yeah, it is. It really is about having options, and that just keeps coming up more and more now than it did before. And it's great. I love it because it allows people to think more creatively about how to solve their problems, whether it's work or life. So, if yoga works for
Mm,
you, that's cool. If you prefer to go rock climbing instead, awesome. If that's what chills you out, do it. It's, whatever
mm.
works for the way that you work.
Unfortunately, yoga didn't work out for me, but I settled on bike riding.
Bike riding's pretty good. It's pretty meditative. Like it's you get your
Oh,
physical activity and
one
it's just
thing.
you get to zone out. It's great.
Yeah,
It's cool.
couldn't agree more with
Nice.
that. Unless it's
Oh
40
yeah, no,
degrees,
that's
then it's
that's not
like,
optimal. We
yeah,
don't do that.
yeah. Then we go back to the gratitude about the
Yes.
aircon, and we're like, oh, this is
But
good.
that works as well. It's all about the situation, the context.
I'm just being
Yeah,
silly now.
still it works. Okay. Ooh, yeah. Getting close to time. So final soft questions. What hobby or interest do you have that's most unrelated to your field of work?
Um, I laugh because this hobby is not going well for me at the moment. I was initially going to go with cycling because I was like, I'm not dressed in lycra, but like my weekend bike rides are very important
Yes.
to me. I got really into aquascaping.
Aquascaping. What's aquascaping?
It's just really intense fish tank building.
Extreme
So
fish tank building.
see,
Awesome.
like, oh, actually, I can imagine if there's not already a show called that or like has that premise, I'm definitely going to start it.
Do it.
No, I had a severe fish tank addiction where at one time I had 6 tanks at home. I had like
Wow.
2 4-foot tanks. I was looking at a double tank setup using some pallet racking. Anyway,
Fancy.
it's like it's fancy, but it's so unnecessary. But it's good. Again, it's kind of I find it I find the same benefit out of bike riding, minus the physical aspect, obviously. But the having to actually craft an environment and being able to create a very self-contained and if you're lucky a very balanced tank is actually a really peaceful thing.
Yeah,
I'm not actually in my study right now. My study is next door where I have 2 of the fish tanks
that's
and there's a
cool.
tiny setup on my desk with some cherry red shrimp and some blue-eyed um, orange tiger shrimp and some
Oh,
fish and all that kind of fun stuff. It's just a little flowing water fountain.
that's
Anyway, I
cool.
know it doesn't float everyone's boat, but it's very meditative. It's very calming. And you know what? I need that in my life.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it sounds like it's like a water zen garden. I like it.
Yeah, that's a much better way to put it.
That's very, very cool. So, because I imagine
Is
that
the
once you
next
set up,
question why?
oh no, not about the price. Like once you set up a tank, I'd imagine it just stays that way. So do you change it up? Do you kind
Yeah,
of?
yeah, it's you do change it up because you're like, oh, maybe I can do this landscape. I can try this. I can try that. Um, I've personally seen a lot of change with my bigger tank because I like to. At one stage, I was breeding guppies,
Ooh.
which I don't know if I'm going to get hate for this, but guppies are like the best way I can describe it is they're like potted color. They don't last particularly long, but gosh, they're pretty.
Yeah.
Um, And there's some really interesting color variations in there.
That's cool.
No, the reason I asked, like, if you were just going to ask me, like, why fish tanks? Like, making things, because I've had this deep interest in how things work.
Yeah.
I also like making things with my hands.
Yes.
So, and it'll be the most random things. Like, in the last place I lived, I made a pond out of like bricks and concrete,
Yeah.
like a little water feature.
That's
And
cool.
it's just little things like that, home renovations, all those kind of things I'm interested in.
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a bit of a joke where my partner and I compare hands, and I'd be like, "Oh, you've got such soft hands," and he'll be like, "Stop it," because I'm always the one that's like got my hands dirty, doing the physical things, like the stereotypical male things. And he's not that way inclined, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But I still love to remind him.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Like, my sister's a bit like that as well. Like, middle of the night, she'll be doing some sort of home fix thing, or she'll, change the shower head, and like she'll just likes doing that sort of stuff. And she's always got some tools in her car at any point in time. It's like, just in case I need to fix something. It's just one of those things that she does.
I would get along with your sister.
Absolutely.
Like, it sounds like we are two peas in a pod.
Exactly. See, I totally get it. Like, now, even though like I do a lot of tech stuff, like, I like making things with my hands. I knit. I make stuff. I sew. It's
cool.
stuff that I just like to do because, firstly, instant gratification. I like the fact that I make something and I can see it. This is great. You can't do that with software very well. So it's to
True.
me, it's making things and seeing the thing, and that's cool. I like it. So I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
I'm gonna be terrible. I don't actually have a childhood book
That's okay.
that I have the strongest memories with.
Yeah.
The only one that comes to mind, it's a stupid one. My parents got a Christmas book, specially printed, that had my name
cool.
and birthday.
Yeah.
It was like one of those customized books. Like Goosebumps books. Nothing that kind of I can tie into like who I am today. Just silly stuff like that.
That's okay. That's perfectly fine. I mean, those sorts of things are the things that, it was in our formative years that kind of connected us with stuff. And I was speaking to someone who, tried to say something a bit more, meaningful. It's like, but I wanted to say Babysitter's Club. It's like, that's fine. You can say Babysitter's Club. This is okay.
Like, to be honest, like this kind of goes back to one of my like comments up top, was like, don't get me wrong, I can read things, I can research, I'll enjoy scrolling through like articles of things that I'm deeply interested in at that point in time. But like, even as a kid, the books were interesting. I think I had like an average interest in books, but really it was Connects.
Yes.
Like, it was. Are you familiar with Connects?
So it's like the building, the construction stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So I grew up in the PlayStation Connects house, whereas all my friends grew up in Nintendo Lego houses.
Yep.
Like I just feel like there was a bit of a divide. Anyway, I was far more interested in Connects and making little cars and like joining it up. And I used to have guinea pigs growing up. And I'd always make little vehicles for them that would like tow them around.
That's awesome.
So like, even from a young age, I was very practical and less into books.
Yep.
I was like, no, just give me something to like build and work with.
That's very cool. I did like that. Yeah, we were definitely a Lego house because I inherited my Lego from my older siblings. But, my sister's partner is like, when is your child old enough for Lego Technic? We'd like to know this.
Just curious.
Just curious.
The Technic stuff is pretty good.
It is.
Like, I actually bought a kit. Now I'm going off on a tangent, but I bought a kit last year of an A60H Volvo haul truck. And that's one of these awesome Technic kits. And I'm like 30. And here's me sitting on the living room floor, like building it. And my partner's just like, what are you doing? And he's like, hairs up, just like bowls everywhere, and just like madly working through this. It hasn't died. It's just changed from Connects to Lego.
Yeah, that's fine.
I converted.
That is fine. It's okay. I'm pretty sure people forgive you. Yeah.
They're like, finally, you're coming over to the good side.
Exactly. I mean, it's now socially acceptable for grown-ups to like Lego. It's fine.
Yeah, half the kits out there these days, you can buy Lego flowers.
I know.
And I'm like, I think that's too far. But
Yeah. I mean, some of the kits are
personally-
insane. Like they're $500, $1,000. Like, holy crap, that's a fairly expensive Lego kit.
Yes.
But yeah, so detailed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nuts.
I'm like, that Volvo kit was probably the most I'd want to spend, and that was like $260.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it has a working engine. It has a scaled working engine. Like, this is the thing.
Yes. Oh,
Anyway, it was a moment of weakness.
that's fine. I think that's really cool. And I saw this article ages ago. Someone built, I'm pretty sure it's a Bugatti Veyron out of Lego.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, that's nuts. Does it work?
I've seen those kits. For someone that like isn't that interested, like I'm interested in Lego, but not this much. But anyway, the Bugatti kits and a number of other Technic kits, you can get some pretty good light kits for.
Awesome.
And you could, yeah, like previous workplace, a bunch of folks that I used to work with were really into them. And this was at the start of the pandemic, and we'd have a look at like, you'd see backgrounds and people would go like, oh, I didn't know you were into that. That was actually one of the really good things in
I
COVID
know.
is looking at people's backgrounds and going, oh, I didn't know you were into that. I didn't know this. I loved that connection as far apart as people were. I think it actually made us seem more human when you actually saw us in our natural environments
agree.
instead of at work.
I did like that. I love all the comments people were making about what's in your background. What's on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. I love that. I love the Zoom videos where you just start looking at the background, getting distracted about the conversation, just trying to see what kind of people, you're talking to.
Like I fell into, I don't know if you want to include this part or not. But
Can.
I actually 3 years ago today, I went to North Korea for a trip for reasons. As a tourist, I make that sound really really
for reasons.
Anyway, I bought 4 reasons. I was like, please, no one. All of a sudden, I hear a knock at the door. Anyway, and I had a poster. I bought things while I was in North Korea. It was in Pyongyang, as you do. And I bought a poster, and it was sitting at the back of my study, right behind me on camera. And I remember after the first Zoom meeting, I was like, ooh, that's probably not a good one to have in the background. Let's take that guy down. Because people are like, it's got the hammer, the sickle, the paintbrush, and I'm like, yeah, let's get that one.
You didn't get any comments?
No, it just sits inside. I had a couple of people that were like, so what's that poster in the background? And then I had to overtell the story to be like, no, like, it's, something I bought overseas. And they're like, sure, whatever, mate.
They suddenly made these judgments about your political alignment.
Yeah, like it was, I definitely moved it after then. I was like, this can go out of view now. I can enjoy this elsewhere.
Oh gosh, yes, the judgments. That's all right. Just move like Pokemon into your background. They can judge you on something else.
There actually is.
Excellent. Which one?
On my there's definitely Pikachu, because I was definitely that kid. I think it's Pikachu, Charmander, and a Chespin. Excellent. Because I really love Chespin.
Really?
With that generation.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I don't like grass types, but Chespin was like adorable. Yeah, I was that guy.
You were that guy. That's all right. Awesome.
Anyway.
And lastly, what advice would you give someone who'd like to do what you do, and what advice should they ignore?
Oh, it's such a good one to end on. This is going to sound corny, but just give it a try. And it's not unique advice either. But honestly, it's one thing that's worked well, at least for myself, with everything that I have done, is it always resulted from, why don't I give it a try? Like my first leadership role on site. I remember there was a bit of a shuffle, and there was a role that was vacant. They were going to go out to hire for that role. And I remember sitting there kind of thinking, what about if I gave it a shot? I'd already been thinking about a leadership role, like lightly. And I remember walking into the engineering manager's office and not demanding, but like saying, it's like, hey, while you're filling that role, do you mind if I really like the opportunity, and we talked about it, and I ended up getting it, and then I ended up getting the permanent role.
Nice.
So it's like, that's one example of, like, typically when I would get feedback of like, oh no, hone your skills here, like do this. This is the normal pathway, things like that. I've kind of gone, nah, stuff it. I actually really want to give that a
Mm-hmm.
go. Or like the North
Yeah.
Korea thing. Uh, that's a funny one that came about because it was just, um, I heard that you could go through tours as a tourist relatively
Mm-hmm.
safely as an Australian citizen. Um, I got told from a few people that I'd surrounded myself with, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that. And then it kind of got to the point of, nah, stuff it, I'm going. And it was honestly one of the best experiences I've had. It was super
Yeah.
fascinating. That's a whole different conversation. But yeah, it's been a bit of a common theme of just
Give
like,
it a go.
do what you want, give it a try, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Flip side, what advice to not listen
Mm-hmm.
to? I kind of said it before. It's, if someone discourages you from something, just, but and not based on
Mm.
fact, because I think it's important to be self-aware enough to know your own capabilities, your own capacity, to make sure you fit in the self-care element. And maybe you'll talk to people who, provide you advice around, hey, this might not be the best thing. That might be really valid
Yeah.
advice. But I found several folks in my life where it's just been a flat out, no, you shouldn't do that, but not grounded in
Mm.
fact, which, if anything, has actually motivated me more to go, okay, you're going to tell me not to do this, I'm going to go do
Yep.
it. A great one was, coming out of high
Mm-hmm.
school. I remember one of my teachers, I won't identify who, I had a conversation with them in year 12, and I was like, I'm thinking about doing mechanical engineering. And they said, oh, there are plenty of other things that you can do, Gabby. Maybe consider something else, which I find really funny
Yeah.
looking back on now.
It is. But yeah, that's such a kind of backhanded bit of advice.
Yeah, there's been so much of it I've received. And I think I have those that know me know that I'm pretty
Yeah.
stubborn. And again, that's just a driver for like, oh, I shouldn't do this. Well, why not? Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
give it a go. Who's holding me back here?
Yes. Excellent. It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I like to
Yeah.
think so.
Hmm. Did they tell you why not to do it?
No, they didn't. Like, I wasn't the best student in
Mm.
that class, and it was like a core competency for going into
Yeah.
engineering. Um, so I made the assumption afterwards. It's like, maybe that's why they
Mm.
suggested it, but they didn't actually outline at the time, like, hey, like, maybe you need to focus on, getting a little bit better grades for this, and that'll give you surefire way. So it wasn't like a
Yeah.
constructive, like, no, but, maybe not now, but if you focus on these
Yeah.
areas, you could. Because that's, I think, a lot better
It
way to phrase
is.
it. They were just like, there's other things that you can
Yeah, it's like,
work through.
so not mech eng, but
And then they
sys
didn't
eng
tell me
works,
what.
right? You just sidestep slightly.
um, yeah. But that's, even if they said that, like, they didn't
Yeah.
suggest anything. I think that was the most
Unhelpful.
kind of annoying part of it. Yeah, it's like, well, if you're going to tell me not to do this,
What do
like,
you think I have an aptitude for
I don't know.
then,
I had,
as an alternative?
yeah, maybe there was another reason there. It was like, maybe not uni in general. Anyway, I make assumptions. That was so long ago, but yeah, I remember it not being
Yeah.
too helpful.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we've all had a little bit of very unhelpful advice like that at some point. Like, yeah, I need a bit more info here.
Yeah, I think that's the important bit with, like, whether it's advice or
Hmm.
feedback, is, um, you know, people share advice and feedback from their
Hmm.
perspectives. And if I can tie this back to mentoring again, they're sharing it from their experiences based on what they can
Hmm.
see. There's a whole lot of, you know, your life and your experiences that person
Yes.
can't see. It's, the saying of, like, take it with a
Hmm.
grain of salt, I think applies, and kind of, you know, taking in what they're saying and applying it to your situation, I think is the most important thing to do there, and not taking it word for
Exactly.
word. And kind of getting hung up on the exact specifics because they might not have
Yeah,
all the context.
absolutely. And it is important because a lot of time you take advice like, no, I don't like advice, but why don't you like that advice? Like, what is it about that advice that doesn't apply to you? And what can you do about it
Yeah,
to make it apply to you? Or what can you change? Or how can you look at something differently to make that work for you?
yeah. And sometimes people give you
Mm.
feedback. Not to labor on this point here, but I've definitely received feedback from people who have still been pretty charged from a situation, and it's pretty bad feedback. Like you look back at it and you're just like, what were you trying to tell me? I think you're angry at something or you're annoyed at something, but you kind of came across like a dickhead. So like again, it's that not again because we haven't really talked about this much, but like there's an art to feedback, to receiving, but
Yes,
also to giving
it's two
feedback.
ways. Yeah.
Um, yeah, kind of like self care. I don't think it's like spoken about enough in terms of like how to like. There's a lot of focus on how to give feedback, but also how to
Yeah.
receive feedback is very important to actually foster
Yeah,
personal growth
absolutely.
and you know keep up. Be a bit resilient when sometimes you get some feedback where you're like, "What are you
Yeah,
talking about? Like, what did you just tell me?"
exactly. And yeah, it's one of those things where I think some people end up feeling very polarized about the advice. But you do have to think about the advice that's given to you when it's charged and when or overly emotional and it's not going to be conveyed in a good way or in a productive way. But no matter what,
Mm,
you don't necessarily have to take it all on, but you can still consider it and think about where that might have come from or ask about where that might have come from later on.
mm,
And seeing how you can make that information useful if it or determine that it's absolutely not useful at all. But some people just take it at face value. And it's like sometimes there's a bit more to it than that. And yeah, it is situational.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I feel like this like leaks onto a
it
different
feels like it
podcast.
should. It does.
I
It's
feel
like do
like
a whole
it's
session about giving and receiving feedback. Like that's a whole thing. Yeah.
yeah. We'll go on Spotify afterwards and be like, "Who's done
Yes.
this before?" No, I'm
Oh,
joking.
probably. I mean, it's a useful thing.
Mm,
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Gabby, for speaking with me today. This has been absolutely amazing talking about all of this very cool stuff and actually delving into a few of these topics, especially, in terms of self-care and the way that we can approach, our own views of ourselves and how, we are going to move forward in our careers and our lives. Like all of this is very important. So if people would like to know more about, the kind of work that you do, where can they go?
probably only to one place. I only have LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn but if people are interested in terms of what FirstMode do, they can hit up firstmode.com. There's a lot of really interesting information on our website around some of the projects
Yeah,
that we tackle. And if I can put a plug in here, we're also looking for, because we have so many projects in our portfolio, we're always interested in really talented people to come and
yeah.
join us in that. So we have a number of different roles that are open on the website. It's definitely worth checking out there.
It is very cool. Yeah, I had a look at some of the blog posts and so detailed, so interesting because it just covers so many different areas.
Well, yeah, the profiles. I don't know if you've made your way to the profiles of some of
Yeah,
the folks that I work with.
it's very
I
cool.
am so humbled by the people I work with, and that's only a snapshot of the people I work with. Like
Yeah,
it's genuinely insane. The team that we have here in Perth and over in Seattle, and I've been fortunate enough to meet both the Perth. Well, I'm in Perth, but the Seattle office as well. Been able to visit
that's
there
cool.
and meet the people. Yeah, it feels like a little bit of a dream.
Ah, that's amazing. Well, that's what you want.
Yeah,
It's amazing to be able to find a space where you love the people you work with and you love the work that you do. It's unicorn.
yeah,
Well, not quite
that's it.
unicorn.
Yeah.
That's a bit grim, but it is a really great thing to aspire for because it happens. It exists, and yeah,
Yes,
it's achievable.
yes. I didn't know it, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. I could go on.
Very cool. All right, well, thank you again for speaking with me today. It has been absolutely wonderful, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation today, and hope that yourself and others, I don't know, that it was interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I found it fascinating. Okay, well, thank you. It was great speaking with Gabriella about her mechanical engineering journey and the progression of her roles in the mining and resources sector and now creative engineering. I also appreciate Gabriella sharing her experiences in mentoring and mental health and talking about how we can look after ourselves for better life balance. To learn more about Gabriella and what we discuss on the show, or to connect with us, please visit the Steampowered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also find out more about Gabriella's work on LinkedIn, the link for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, and share this with your geeky or geek curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon and Ko-fi under Steam Powered Show, the links for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.